Hey guys, welcome to Walking with Disciples. This week we're starting on Paul, Acts chapter 21, Paul's arrest. So from the remainder of Acts, from this point of Acts chapter 21, verse 27, through the end of Acts chapter 28, is Paul's journey as an arrested individual. And so it's going to be interesting over the next couple of days, actually the next couple of weeks, as we kind of cover the journey of Paul to Rome, where he ends up. It's kind of his final destination. It's going to be very interesting to kind of follow this part of the story, right? So we've always talked about Acts being a kind of a roller coaster, a lot of twist plots, a lot of different things coming in the arch, right? We've talked about the arch over, and kind of here we're at that final arch point with Paul. And like I said, for the next six and a half chapters, basically, we're going to see Paul's final journey, if we want to put it that way. So let's get started. Verse 27, chapter 21. Says, when the 7 days were almost completed, the Jews from Asia seeing him in the temple. Now, if you remember from last week, we talked about that Paul went to see James, the brother of Jesus, the leader of the church, and James just said, "Hey, they're gonna know you're here, and there's already rumors out that you're telling Jews not to follow Jewish law, which is completely wrong, right? But why don't you do this? Why don't you take these guys that have made a vow and pay for their stuff, right? Make a vow, go through the process with them, purification process with them." So it says, when the 7 days were almost complete. Now, a vow is normally 30 days. So the 7 days is not time. It's kind of talking about the purification point, right? It says that Jews from Asia. Now, if you've been with me for a while, you should be thinking Ephesus, Corinth, right? That area. And more likely, from what we can tell, we'll see here, they're probably from Ephesus, right? It says that seeing him in the temple stirred up the whole crowd and laid hands on him. So they recognized Paul by his face. They knew him right away. He wasn't preaching. He wasn't doing it. He was just going through the purification process. And it says, and they laid hands on him and crying out, "Men of Israel, help. This is the man who's teaching everyone everywhere against the people and the law and this place. Moreover, he brought Greeks in the temple and has defiled this holy place. For they had previously seen Trophimus, the Ephesian, who with him in the city." So again, that's why most people would say probably the Jews from Ephesus that saw him. It's interesting though. The first claim that they make against Paul is that this man is teaching everyone everywhere against people in the law in this place. Do you remember that line of accusation? Do you remember? That's how good you guys are. I know you can't answer me, but I'm giving you a half second to think about it. This is exactly the line of reasoning, the accusation against Stephen. And if you remember, Stephen was the first martyr. Paul was at that moment. So it's very interesting that we've come full circle at this point. And at the martyrdom of Stephen, Paul was there holding the cloaks. And now here we've got Paul, and he's in the same position Stephen was in. And so they go on and said, not only that, but he's brought Gentiles into the temple. Now, if you've been with me for the temple series I had, or you've heard me talk about it before, there was actually an area that the Gentiles could go into, right? It's the same area that we would see Jesus go in and kick out the money changers and the others that were selling impure sacrifices, the other things, right? It would have been that same area, right? That they were allowed to go into, but they couldn't go any farther. Now, these guys had saw a Gentile with Paul, and Paul is now in the temple, a place Gentiles could not go, so they just make an accusation, right? Man, is that not our world, right? That just because we see something, we automatically make a judgment about that. And so they saw him together outside the temple and just assumed, well, Paul's in the temple, and so he probably brought him with him. So it basically says, verse 30, then all the city was stirred up and the people ran together. They seized Paul and dragged him out of the temple, and at once the gates were shut. The gates to the temple were shut. And as they were seeking to kill him, word came to the tribune of the cohort that all Jerusalem was in confusion. So it came to the Romans, right? Let them know. Now it's interesting to me that the Jews are so angry, so upset at what was going on, but they weren't too upset to actually do it in the temple. They actually drag him out. And I think this really speaks to religion, the difference between a religion and a relationship, right? Because they're saying, hey, we're going to do this because we're protecting God, right? We're protecting our religion. That's really what they were doing. They're protecting their religion. But they understood that if the true religion would have said that they couldn't do what they were going to do, they wanted to kill him within the temple. So they had to take it out. And so often, I think, as Christians, one of the things that you may have heard me say or others have said, that we need to be the same in the church as outside the church. And we get that from these moments. In the church, they're like, we can't kill him in here, but it'll be okay if we kill him outside the church. That's wrong, right? In the temple, we can lay our hands on him, we're going to drag him out, but we're not going to perform the killing inside the temple. That's religion in the worst case scenario, right? And you and I need to be very cautious that we're not the same way, that we're like, well, in the church I won't do this in the church, but it's okay for me to do it outside the church. I think of language, cussing, right? Using bad words, foul language. Let me just tell you this. The Bible speaks completely against it, right? Let what comes out of your mouth to be pure, right? And yet I know so many that don't have a problem with that outside of the church. They have a problem. I know non-Christians who won't cuss in the church, but they'll cuss outside the church. I know Christians who won't cuss inside the church, but they'll cuss outside the church, right? That's wrong. Just as wrong as what they're doing right now. And it says the word came to the cohorts, came to the centurions, right? The leaders, the ones that try to keep peace, right? Because one of the things we need to remember about Jerusalem, Jerusalem was always a city of riots, always a city of confrontation. In AD 70, 69, they burn it down, right? It's just horrible what has happened. And so they're always trying to keep peace. He at once took soldiers and centurions and ran down to them. So this, the tribune, right? The leader came up and they arrested Paul, and ordered him to be bound between two chains. Now, when they say two chains, what they're talking about is they would have probably chained his right arm to a soldier's right left arm, and vice versa. Left arm would have been chained to another soldier's right arm. It was for two things. One, it was for Paul's protection, right? He was getting beat up, right? He was getting beat up. The people only stopped because they saw the Romans coming and thought, well, it's going to be the worst thing that can happen is rioting, because then they're gonna do all they can to stop the rioting, right? Which would not have been pretty. So not only for protection, but also to show the Jews around them that were beating him, hey, we're gonna find justice. We're gonna do this. So two signs there. So when you see that idea that he was chained between two men, or two chains, that's why. He, again, when they're talking about he at this point, they're talking about the tribune, that leader, right? He inquired who he was and what he had done, and some in the crowds were shouting one thing, some in another. Do you remember the riots of Ephesus? Basically the same thing all over again. You remember we talked about that, I think, last Monday, right? And he couldn't learn the facts because of the uproar, he ordered him to be brought into the barracks. And listen to this. This is how bad it got. And when he had come to the steps, he was actually carried by the soldiers because of the violence of the crowd. So they had to pick him up and carry him in because people were still trying to beat him, even through the Roman soldiers, right? And for the mob of the people followed, crying out, carrying, when they carried him out, they're crying out, away with him, right? They wanted him dead. They wanted him killed. So I think, as we start this road of Paul now as a prisoner, he's from now on is going to be a prisoner until his death, right? When we see this, we got to understand that what's happening is their emotional state of the individuals got to such a fervor that no logic is going to help. Nothing is going to change their mind. They want blood. Now, again, we know Paul never speaks out against the Jewish law, other than to say that Gentiles don't have to follow it, right? But their big thing is that you're trying to get rid of our religion. You're trying to get rid of the law of Moses, right? You're trying to do that, and so I really, as we enter this time frame, I really want us to take a moment and to think back in our own lives and think back to what are some things that maybe we're holding on to, emotionally holding on to, that are actually stopping what God wants. Because what God wants was he wanted all, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that all the world, right? And that's what he wanted. And he wanted them to get it past the point of just the Jews, but everyone. The Jews didn't want that. They didn't want that. They wanted their law, their thing to continue on. And they got so emotionally wrapped up that they couldn't take a half a second and think, maybe God is doing something. So join me tomorrow. We're going to continue on. We're going to hear Paul's response to this in the beginning of his journey. So love you guys. Have a great day.